This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in the future, but after discovering all the different jobs that coffee has, I don't think there's ever going to be an end to what I can be.
We love celebrating the next generation of keen hospitality professionals on the Dirty Linen podcast. And when I heard that there was a 16-year-old who had devoted himself to coffee at Sydney's Single O, I just had to find out more. Today's guest is Liam Scotchmer, someone who is absolutely passionate about coffee. Liam, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Thanks, Dani. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to be talking to you. Now, I think the question I need to start with is, what coffee got you up this morning?
So this morning, I brewed a pour over, and it was a geisha coffee from a roastery in Amsterdam called Manhattan Coffee Roasters. And it tasted like a straight mango. I'm not making that up. So that was a really nice way to start the morning for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, mangoes are a great way to start the day, that is for sure, as is coffee. And I can already hear, the depth of knowledge that you have about your field. Tell us about your work at Single O. What kinds of things do you do in a typical day?
So I work full-time at Single O now, so I do 5 days a week. And every day is a little bit different. Some days I'm opening the cafe, some days I'm closing the cafe. But it's been quite a surprise for me, all the responsibility I've already been given, like the keys to the cafe and everything. But I think because of this responsibility, I've learnt so much over the past only 5 months. But every day I work as a barista, so I'm dialing in espresso in the morning, or I'm dialing in our batch brew. It's just a lot of coffee drinking and socializing. And I don't think anyone working there, I don't think we go an hour without hugging each other. So yeah, it's just feels like home.
That's so nice. I mean, it does sound like it's a great culture there to have, that responsibility and all that learning. Can you tell us, not everyone listening to this would know about Single O. Can you tell us a bit about the company?
So Single O started in 2003, so 20 years ago. They started at this same cafe that I work at, just as a small cafe. But now we've been roasting our own coffee beans for 20 years. And we do a lot of single origin coffee and our blends, but we do wholesale for a lot of cafes, and a lot of retail coffee for customers as well.
And what's it like as a place to work? Like, how would you describe the atmosphere and the culture there?
Well, like I said, we don't go an hour without hugging each other, so it just feels like a second family for me. It's we don't need to wear a uniform or anything, so we just come in like it's home, and it feels like home for me. And some days I've even gone out for dinner with the customers and everything, so I kind of know everyone now. So yeah.
That's really amazing. I've got to say, I was out in Melbourne on Saturday I went out, had some tapas at Movida next door, which is one of my favourite spots in town. But then we needed a coffee, and they don't do coffee there. So, well, we needed coffee and we needed dessert. So we ended up at Supernormal having their famous peanut butter parfait and a pear tart. And the coffee on the menu was single O. So I had a latte and it was absolutely smashing. I loved it.
Yeah, you can find single O all over Australia now, so you can't ever miss it. So it's pretty special. Yeah.
Yeah, it was such a good blend. It really had a lot of power and a lot of character, and could really sort of find its way through the richness of the peanut butter parfait. So, yeah, I really appreciated it, especially knowing that I was going to be chatting to you, Liam.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, it was so cool. So I think, people listening would have a lot of questions in their mind about a 16-year-old who's working full-time at Single O. Tell us about how you got excited about coffee and what took you to this job.
So it all started a few years ago when I moved to Newcastle, and I moved to Derby Street. So Derby Street is the main cafe street of Newcastle. And so every day my mum would take me down to the cafes for a coffee before school. And that's kind of where it began. We went to this cafe called Goldberg's, and it's just a really dark cafe. All the walls are painted black and all the furniture is really vintage and everything. But that's kind of where it all started. I started with like a massive latte, like a lot of milk. So definitely much different to what I'm drinking now. But that's kind of where it all started. And then my mum would just take me there every morning. So cafes have just kind of become a second home for me. So I always feel really comfortable in them.
Wow. And did you start experimenting at home with coffee?
So at that point, I hadn't started with coffee. It actually started more after 2 years of living in Newcastle. I moved to Berlin with my twin sister and my mum. And we lived in Berlin for about 2 years. And so this was during lockdown. But I ended up going to school there, and Mum just threw me in school, and I didn't know any German, so that was quite difficult. But we learnt German quite quickly, so we started to get into the rhythm of it. But I remember one day, it was the weekend, and I was walking along this, it sounds quite cliche, but I was walking along this canal, and I saw this French bakery, and I was bored, so I was like, imagine if I just emailed this place for a job. And so that's what I did later that night. And I remember a week later, the owner of this French bakery got back to me, and he said he'd love to have a trial with me. So that it kind of just begun from there. So I took a trial shift there, and then I started working every weekend as kind of the barista's assistant. So I'd be doing dishes, but also restocking the beans, and just organizing things, and also making the batch brew using a mini mocha master. So I'd make all the filter coffee for the customers, and it kind of just begun from there. So I just got really addicted to it after that point. But I remember before I left Berlin, this French bakery, they had a farewell party for me. And Travis, who was the head barista there, as my gift, he bought me a Comandante, which is a manual hand grinder for grinding coffee. And it's one of the best in the world. So that was quite a surprise for me. But when I came back to Australia, I had this hand grinder, and I got an AeroPress, and I was just like, what am I supposed to do with this? So I just went on YouTube, and that's where it all began. I just started experimenting with it.
Right. Well, as a recent convert to the AeroPress, I'm feeling very aligned with your journey.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. Do you remember the first coffee you made that you were happy with?
Yeah, I do remember actually. It was from a roastery, which is now actually up the street from where I work, called Reuben Hills. and it was an Ethiopian pea berry. And that was the first coffee I ever made that I could actually really drink. But I remember doing that at home in the morning before Mum drove me to school. So that was, I remember doing that in my AeroPress. So that was a really nice surprise.
That's really amazing.
Yeah, that coffee definitely got me into this. Yeah.
And I mean, so what happened with starting to work at Single O? Like, did you leave school to do that? What happened there?
So I was, after we'd moved back to Australia from Berlin, we were living near Port Macquarie, and I didn't enjoy school because it was quite hard to learn in the classroom. Everyone was shouting and swearing, and the teachers weren't able to teach us anything really. So I actually I resorted to I taught myself French instead. So I was known as the French kid then. So I just did French in every class, and the teachers were fine with that because they knew I was learning, and they were struggling to get the kids involved in what the teachers were trying to teach them. So I just did French all day. And because of that, I discovered that I could just learn a lot more just by teaching myself things. So I just decided I'd leave school and then do what I really, really wanted to do, which was coffee. So that's where it started.
That is really amazing. I just think it's such an incredible insight so early in life to realize that, yeah, you can follow your passion, and if the environment around you isn't engaging in terms of learning, you can forge a path yourself. That shows incredible maturity. So did you target Single O and this move to Sydney, or how did that come about?
So I just knew I wanted to work in a coffee roastery in Sydney. So I already knew of Single O, but if I wanted to move to Sydney, I wanted some security. I didn't want to move to Sydney and then be worried about being jobless or something. So I actually emailed quite a few different roasteries, and most of them got back to me like straight away. So there was no issue of being jobless. I had a ton of different opportunities at different places. But Single O started because when I had a trial shift there, I just remember doing it. I worked for like 2 hours, and I just remember the first thing I thought in my head was, wow, everyone's like a pirate here. Like, that's literally what I thought. Everyone just reminded me of pirates, and I just knew I wanted to be here, and it was just completely my vibe. Like, the whole place is painted black. There's no TVs. It's all vintage furniture. And it was just, everyone was so kind to me, and my age didn't faze them as well. So that was really good. But I remember when I was trying to organize different jobs at different places, Millie, who runs Single O in Surry Hills, the cafe, she actually called me during my maths class. And so my math teacher actually knows Single O, so I quickly asked my math teacher if I could run out and call Single O. So Millie doesn't actually know this, but she called me during my maths class, and then snap, like 5 months later, I'm working full time with her. So that's kind of funny to me.
I love that. That's really amazing. So that's such a big move to make at the age of 16. Like, how did you sort of get yourself sorted to move to Sydney in terms of accommodation and taking on this role?
Well, after I found the job at Single O, I obviously needed some accommodation. So it was, at the beginning, it was quite a nightmare looking for accommodation on places like Flatmates, but I ended up going on a Facebook group and making a post there about myself and that I'd gotten a job at Single O, but I just needed a place to stay. And I remember waking up in the morning after making that post with hundreds of notifications from people. So yeah, that was quite a surprise because I'd heard about all the nightmares of people trying to find accommodation, but I had too many places to choose from. So, um, yeah, but I eventually chose to go with Jane, who I live with now in Sydney, and her two daughters. So, yeah, they just feel like a second family to me. So that's really good.
Yeah, it's amazing. It just feels like some kind of magnetic force has led you to the right path. Tell us about some of the people that you work with at Singolo.
So I work with Singolo's quite big. We've got a roastery in Botany, and then here we've got our cafe. But we've got quite a few baristas, floor staff, and then at the roastery we've got coffee trainers, green coffee buyers, people who roast the coffee, people who do wholesale. There's a lot of moving parts at the company, but that's what really excites me. I never get bored because there's always something new I can try to achieve in the future.
And, you mentioned that you've learnt so much. Can you talk to me about, I don't know, something that was challenging to learn? And I suppose what comes to mind is latte art, because I think that must be so hard to learn to pour the milk and create those perfect designs.
Well, actually, when I first started in coffee, that's all I wanted to do. It was latte art, and I think that's really important. But after working at Singolo, I think the most important part is actually the flavor. So learning to dial in a coffee. And that involves learning all the different variables, like the dose you want to use, the yield, the grind size, the temperature. So that's actually what really fascinates me about coffee. It's never boring. There's always a billion different variables you have to worry about when dialing in a coffee in the morning. So I think that's the most interesting part.
For me, coffee is so interesting because it connects you with, distant lands and people who are growing the beans, in places that it's perhaps even hard to imagine. Do you feel like that? Like, how do you feel about, the journey of coffee, all from these, faraway places to a cup in Sydney?
Well, I think it's really interesting, especially at Singolo, because we're offering so many different single origins, and it's always such an exciting opportunity when we get a new coffee. Like last week, we got a coffee from Ethiopia. It's an Ethiopia Shantawini, and it's always so exciting to taste a coffee from Ethiopia or from Costa Rica because the flavors are just so fun to see how they change depending on where they're from.
And can you imagine this coffee journey taking you to origin at some point?
I hope so one day, but 5 months ago I didn't know anything about all of these different coffee origins. I thought it was just, I thought coffee was just latte art, but that's why that's why I've just become totally obsessed. I'm quite meticulous. I love to, especially weigh things and everything, and this is really why I've become involved in coffee, because it's all about weighing everything, timing everything, and measuring just absolutely everything. So that's why I really enjoy it.
What is it that's engaged you, do you think? Like, there is so much detail in it. There's so much to know. But what do you think it is about the world of coffee that's really entranced you?
Well, ever since I moved to Sydney, I spend most of my afternoons with all of my barista friends. Like today, I'm going to be going to Diggy Doos and we'll be cupping coffee that my friend brought over from America. And then we'll be learning about different coffees, roasteries in America are offering. But everyone's just so kind to me. I'm not sure why, but like last week, the cafe manager of Honor Sydney texted me on Instagram asking me if I wanted to brew coffee with him. So I went to Honor after work the other day, and we just brewed coffee for like 4 hours, just learning about the different variables and everything. And the manager's like a proper adult, and he he just wanted to like brew coffee with me and spend his time brewing coffee with me. So that I think I've never found that in my whole life before. But it doesn't just end there. Like every Monday at 4 o'clock, I brew coffee with Caleb, who he runs multiple different cafes in Surry Hills, like Reuben Hills, Paramount Coffee Project, Mama's Boy. But he always tries to make time to brew coffee with me. And so that's what we do every Monday after work. And sometimes we're just stacking V60s on top of each other and then putting like whiskey balls in them to like see how freezing the liquid from the beans immediately after extracting them changes the flavor. But we just do random things like that, and we just end up drinking so much coffee. But I was there yesterday, and we were brewing coffee together, and the bakery upstairs just came down, and just out of nowhere they just gave us like 30 hot cross buns for Easter. So we're just brewing coffee in the cafe with 30 hot cross buns sitting on the table, and just having fun and learning and things. So yeah.
What has discovering this love of coffee meant for you? Like, how has it affected your life?
Well, I think it's found somewhere where I want to be. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in the future, but after discovering all the different jobs that coffee has, I don't think there's ever going to be an end to what I can be. I'd love to become a green coffee buyer in the future, or I'd love to roast coffee, or I'd love to do what Dani does. He drives around Sydney training people how to make coffee, and then on the weekends he makes coffee. So there's just like never an end to what I can be doing. So yeah.
That's so inspiring. Tell us a bit about Dani, because I understand he's your mentor.
Oh yeah, so Dani, we work together at Carriage Works on Saturdays, making coffee, and in 5 hours we do like 500 to 600 coffees. So it's pretty intense, but that's how we've become really close, I think. But other than that, he during the week works as one of the trainers of Singular. So he runs around Sydney training the cafes that use Singular on how to use the coffee. So yeah, that's definitely what I would love to do in the future one day.
Is there something that you know you want to learn next, like something you'd really love to dig into a bit more?
At the moment, I'm trying to perfect, I'm really into this thing called a V60, which makes filter coffee. And it's called pour over coffee, and that's definitely my next mission. There's going to be there's a couple competitions happening in a few weeks, so I'm definitely excited to join them. But also next year, I would love to do Brewers Cup, which is a competition for V60 brewing, and that'll be in Melbourne. So I'm definitely slowly going to make my way towards doing that next year. But yeah, there's never an end to.
I can just imagine, like, you would love Melbourne. I cannot imagine how how excited you'd be wandering around all the Melbourne cafes and discovering a whole other city's coffee culture.
Yeah, and it's crazy. I don't know if you know Arnie Pegs, but Dani, there's another Dani, but Dani, the lady who used to run Arnie Pegs, she messaged me saying that when I come down to Melbourne, we can do a coffee tour together. But that's just crazy to me, because I'm like 16 and all of these coffee professionals are happy to spend their time teaching me about coffee. It's just crazy to me. Yeah.
It doesn't surprise me. So Liam, with the V60, I remember when I got my AeroPress and I started like watching a bit of YouTube as well, I was so amazed about the variables and the level of detail with making a pour over coffee, which at first glance would seem quite simple. Don't you just pour hot water over coffee? But there's a lot more to it than that, isn't there?
Yeah, I thought the same when I first bought a V60. It's just this plastic cone-shaped thing that you can definitely just pour water straight over it. But I think what really why I'm so obsessed about it is all of the different variables you have to control. Like the water temperature, the dose you use, how much water you use, the grind size that you do. Like it's making a coffee in the morning has definitely just become a mini science experiment for me. Like last night I brewed a cup of coffee at 100 degrees, and then this morning I decided I wanted a bit more acidity, so I dropped the temperature 4 degrees. But that I just find that so much fun for me. Yeah.
Isn't there also stuff like how you sort of swirl the water, like the shape that you make?
Yeah, exactly. So you can swirl the V60, or you can use a spoon to agitate the coffee bed. It's a never-ending rabbit hole. And I've definitely had like restless nights just being on YouTube, watching tons of different V60 tutorials, and I've just ended up going to bed at like 4 a.m. just because I just can't perfect it. But yeah.
Liam, do you have a favourite coffee experience that you could share with us?
My favourite, that's definitely a hard question for me to answer. But at the moment, one of my friends, he's called Young. He's the Australian Cup Taster of 2022, and this year he'll be flying down to Greece in June to compete for to represent Australia in the World Cup Tasters competition. But despite his fame, I just hang out at his house and we just brew coffee. He lives in the city, so right next to the window we're just brewing V60 while watching the taxis go by. But I think that it just means so much to me that this busy person is happy for me to brew coffee with him at his house.
I love that.
So yeah, everyone's just given me so much time, even though they're so busy. So yeah.
Well, I mean, you're obviously putting in the hours and the enthusiasm as well. So I'm glad that you're finding that reciprocated. Liam, it's been an absolute thrill to chat to you and just to hear everything that you're experiencing and learning. If someone was listening to this or another young person, they thought they were pretty into coffee, like what advice would you give them to take the next step?
As cliche it is, I think you should just go for it. You can't expect anyone to teach you things. You need to teach it yourself. People aren't going to give you the answer. And I've really found that when I have a question, no one gives me the answer. They just tell me how to find the answer. And I think you need to be really open to that.
Yeah, beautiful. What great advice. It just makes me think of you in that noisy maths classroom learning French. It's just basically get on with it, guys.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would walk through school and all the teachers would be like, bonjour, Liam, because they just knew that's like all I was learning. But that was a really good experience because I just taught myself that I can just learn so much more if I just do what I like to do. So, yeah, it's definitely worked out. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so great, and so glad you found such a nurturing home at Single O. It's been an absolute thrill to chat, and I cannot wait to watch your journey. Liam, make sure you stay in touch because, yeah, I need to know all the steps along your glittering pathway.
I definitely will.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Dani.
Absolute pleasure.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtyLinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This